Hello and greetings to everyone watching this webinar on gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. My name is Janvir Sandhu, and my moderator is
Anthony Montalvo.
We today are presenting this webinar to you in order to facilitate learning and curiosity and education around gender identity and expression and orientation here at HomeFirst. So I hope you enjoy. Again, as you know, this is a recorded webinar, so you do have a facilitator in the room. If there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Moderator, facilitator, please feel free to pause our recording and answer questions as they come up, just to facilitate the process. Of course, you probably want to pause now and think about your emergency exits. If there's folks new in the room, think about pointing out where the restrooms are, where the waters are, and of course follow all emergency procedures as noted. So, all right, with that, we'll continue with our presentation here today. All right, so our group rules, of course, is to make sure that we all have a consensus and kind of understand and are on the same page. The training topics here are real topics. If any other personal information comes to mind, please remember to keep things confidential. Everyone in this room deserves a safe space to speak, to hear, to be curious, and to think through thoughts and understand the processes. So let's create a respectful space for all of this. Speak from a place of respect with respect. That kind of talks about thinking about what you're putting out there, and kind of filtering it through a lens and thinking about how it will be heard by someone, thought about by someone, before before sometimes we kind of have a tendency of speaking on things before we can really get it out to a place where we want to be. So let's speak from a place of respect with respect. Do not use client names or client experiences as examples to highlight your point. Speak generally and from your own experience. We want to make sure and respect our clients' and participants' confidentiality, as well as honoring your experience. So we want to hear about your thoughts and your experience. And lastly, please use the language of respect. That's something we're going to be talking about today. What is the language of respect? We're going to be learning it together. So we would like for us in this training, and of course outside of this training, to continue to use the language of respect. With that, our goals of the training today are to understand national homelessness and LGBTQ homelessness statistics, to review terms of gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, what's transgender, what's cisgender, and a few other terms. We have a handout for you that we will review, and your facilitator will pass out for you to review today as well. So for us to review these terms together, for us to understand and to challenge our own personal biases, and to do that in a large setting. I know it can be a little strange, but we're going to try to do that together. And how to convey universal respect as part of customer service, program enrollment, and engagement. We're going to think about how to use the language of respect and really creating an open space for everyone as part of the work that we do here at HomeFirst. We already do this, but really being cognizant and mindful about what we do and how we do it. All right. Anthony, do you want to explain a little bit about the pictures that are going to pop up during our presentation?
Yeah, definitely. So throughout the presentation, when we change between topics, you'll see title pages such as this, behind which you'll see photos, images of people. These photos were selected specifically to highlight identities that are gender non-conforming, gender expansive, and maybe fall under the umbrella of transgender identities. This is not in any way representative of every transgender person or every gender non-conforming person, but it does highlight some ways that our LGBTQ community may appear from the outside. And it may also highlight the fact that some of these people do not look particularly different from any other person you may meet. So it's a little bit of food for thought as we continue through our presentation.
Great, thank you. All right, so the universal language of respect. So this is where we introduce our conversation around pronouns, identifying our own pronouns when introducing ourselves, and the correct way to refer to someone. That's one of the correct ways that we refer to someone outside of their own name. So we, sometimes we assume that we can gather all the information about someone by looking at them. And sometimes this is accurate and sometimes it's not. Especially for individuals who are coming into a shelter setting, they may not have access to, or financial access or economic access in any way to really express themselves the way they see themselves, the way they would best like to show the world who they are. Of course, that's one of the reasons, why we're providing them with services at this level. So when someone's coming into a shelter setting, they're not able to dress in that way. They're not able to present themselves in that way. And so we cannot assume from what we're seeing that this is how someone wants to portray themselves. So instead of assuming, you're going to ask. Asking someone to identify themselves, asking with this question, can you give me a name that you're most comfortable using? Or can you give me your legal name or the name that you go by? If that's different, you can give me that as well. That's a great way of asking them exactly how they would like to be identified. And of course, if this is not just a touch and go conversation, if this is more of a rapport building or something that a conversation where you're gonna be more of an in-depth conversation with someone, that's where you want to take the time and identify your pronouns and ask them for theirs. So let's take an example of how we would do that really quickly. So Anthony, I am I so I'm going to try this. So
Yeah.
I identify as female. So I would say my name is Jen and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Definitely, that sounds like an appropriate use of pronouns. If I were to do a similar situation, a similar example, I could say, "Hi, my name is Anthony. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm choosing to use those pronouns because I don't specifically identify or subscribe to the idea of me being called male or masculine, and I would like to have the opportunity for someone to address me in a gender neutral or gender affirmative way." Um, this could go in any other way too. If we were to do this again, we could also say,
I could say, "Hi, my name's Janvier, and I'll use the pronouns they this time. I would like my pronouns are they and theirs."
yeah, that could work. Yeah. Also, as Janvier said earlier, you can always use your name. Someone can always identify with their name. If you're working with someone, if you meet someone, a client, a participant, and they seem uncomfortable or there's discomfort in the idea of using a different pronoun, that is okay. Not everybody is ready to identify with different pronouns. Some of us don't really think about that. We all have pronouns. We all have a set of pronouns that if you were to leave this room right now and everyone in the room were to talk about you, you would have specific pronouns that you would want other people to use. Um, and we don't think about that consciously. So sometimes it's more appropriate to just say, "Hey, I'm going to address you by your first name because I respect you. The name you've given me is a name that I know you identify with." So if the person's name is Rose, you may call them Rose. If the person's name is Greg, you can call them Greg. If the person's name is something you've never heard of before, that's great. You just learned a new name you didn't know existed and use that name.
Exactly. This is a great way to remind yourself of the name that they want to use. And it's a great way of getting someone's attention. If you ever want to drop someone's name in a conversation, you'll have their ear. Their attention will turn to what you're saying much more. So another way of addressing someone is just by using their name. It sounds sometimes a little tedious, but if you do it enough, it's much better than incorrectly identifying someone or misusing a pronoun and offending them and creating a point of trauma for themselves.
And I think that's a really good point. What we're trying to do here is really build a relationship, starting at that first initial point of contact where you introduce yourself, you start conversing about needs, about where they're at, and it doesn't even get into the point of maybe what they need from you, but really just identify that they're a person that deserves respect, and we give them that respect at a simple conversational level. We always want to respect people. Pronouns and names are a very easy way to do it without having to get into the nitty gritty about some of the stuff we'll talk about later.
Exactly. And again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, that you wouldn't want to introduce a pronoun if you, let's say, at our shelter site, you are just doing a check-in process. That's too quick of an interaction for you to really exchange a lot of information with. This might be where you're asking, can you please give me a name that you're comfortable using? Can you know, and then we leave it with this. They give you a name in which they've already identified themselves in the system, and we move on. But later on, if you're ever filling out a VI SPDAT, a more in-depth assessment, that's where we would sit down, properly introduce ourselves with our pronoun, ask for theirs, so we create that level of comfort, space, safety for them to really be their full self. All right, here's some common examples of respectful terms besides using our pronouns in larger settings. Sometimes we've heard the terms sir or ma'am, and these are very gender specific terms, and they show either one or the other, feminine or masculine. And one great way of using a neutral term would be to just say hello or hi there. And we mentioned this earlier, is to use their name if this is one individual. And for a group,
A lot of people will use the phrase, hey, you guys, hey, ladies and gentlemen. There are a lot of ways we try to get a group of people's attention. And those are fine, but if you really want to try to affirm everyone's identity and make sure everyone feels included in the conversation, you might want to try something like, hello, folks, hello, you all, hi, everyone, hi, all, or my favorite, hi, y'all. All of these are fine. We generally try to stay away from these gendered honorifics like sir or ma'am, or also these grouped words like you guys, you ladies, because it makes a lot of assumptions about the people in the room. It assumes you understand everybody's gender, and it assumes that everybody feels like they're included in the conversation. And that may not be the case for every person that walks through your doors that you interact with. So we really want to start off at a really base level that includes everybody. May hear other words in language outside of work, outside of this premises. When you order food, you may hear someone say, oh, the host or hostess,
right,
the waiter, the waitress. Those are gendered words. And if you're working with someone, if you're speaking with someone, and they don't particularly identify with that gender, that may cause a little bit of trauma, a little bit of hurt. You could say something similar to that. As an example, they are very masculine presenting, but they have a very high-pitched voice for their gender. And whenever they go through drive-thrus, they're always referred to as ma'am. Every time. Every time they try to order McDonald's or Burger King or Taco Bell, all of that great, delicious fast food, they're referred to as a gender that they don't particularly identify with. And for them, that makes them very upset. And if they were to come into one of our services here, one of the programs or the offerings you have here at HomeFirst, and they were to be referred to in the same way, they would turn off. They would probably not continue trying to speak with whoever it is who's addressing them with the wrong gender. And the person may be meaning well. You may mean very well with the words you use, but we can still cause hurt and impact people without knowing. So we want to be a little bit more conscious about the words we use when we address folks in general.
Definitely. That's a great point. And thank you for sharing that example. For your partner to have that experience, I could imagine then when they pull up to the drive-through window, when they pull up and the person sees them and they realize that they've misgendered them, now this is uncomfortable for both, right? And I'm not sure if that gets resolved. I'm not sure if that gets, if you, again, this is sort of a touch and go conversation. They're not getting to know your partner, but now you've created a micro trauma for someone who we didn't need to get there. So this is a common example that happens to your partner at some point, and you can imagine in the least offending way, someone at a drive-through window decided or created a situation that didn't need to exist if we all just said hello there, and there it is, right? We don't respond to the cues sometimes, and that takes time, that takes work and effort, and it's a very specific example, but not all examples are the same way. It's a great highlight of you can't always assume from what you see or what you hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Very welcome.
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about homelessness in Santa Clara County. I hope a lot of you have heard about the Home Not Found study. It was conducted between 2006 and 2012 in Santa Clara County, underwritten by the County of Santa Clara and conducted by Destination Home. From 2006 and 2007, it took a year to just cut the red tape just for communication to occur between the different systems of care. And what we wanted to know at this point was a lot of individuals were homeless in the county of Santa Clara, and systems were asking, the county was asking, of course, it's a financial issue for them. They were asking, quote unquote, whose problem is this, right? Who is working to end homelessness? That we didn't have the partnerships that we have today. We didn't have the system that we created today. So back in the day, you could imagine there were some systems that were working with homeless individuals, even though that wasn't their end goal. Um, so you could imagine what some of those systems were. I'm going to give you the answer and say that the most amount of run-ins that individuals were having, individuals that were homeless, were having run-ins with the judiciary system, with the prison and law enforcement system, and also with the health and hospital system in the form of emergency room contact. So emergency room contact and judicial system contact was quite high for individuals, but these services, these county departments essentially were noticing that services are being used, but they're not addressing the issue, right? Because even as an ER provider, you want to see the number of individuals seeking emergency services reduce, go down. And they were seeing that go down in some areas, but not for others. And so then they started to track these trends of homelessness. Same thing for the judicial system. So as a county, they wanted to find out whose issue is this, right? Whose funding should really be used to address this? Because at that point, the ER system, our judicial system was only treating the symptomology, the symptoms of being homeless, and it wasn't the end all be all. And again, these services were being utilized without really an end in sight. So in that time between 2006 and 2007, we cut all the red tape. We talked through all the HIPAA regulation. You could imagine how hard it was for the health and hospital system to give up all of that privacy, right, and confidentiality, have people sign off on consents and make sure that the whole system is still protected. Same thing for the judicial system, to track each and every single person's homelessness and point of contact as they came across in different systems of care. And between 2007 and 2012, we found that 104,206 individuals were homeless in that 6-year study period. And the statistic that pops out the most is 20% were homeless for only 1 month or less, and 32% were homeless for about 2 to 6 months, which means that over half the population, 52% of the population, homelessness was not a long-term way of life. This was something that was brief and episodic, which challenged people's beliefs. It challenged that stigma that homelessness created, that is someone who is homeless is going to be homeless for a long time, or they're going to be homeless and that's what they want to do, right? We as homeless service providers know that that's not true. Again, we're specialists in this area, but for the general public, for the general county, this was news. This was news back in the day. Again, out of that study, we found out they were talking about numbers. They wanted to find out how much it was costing the system. And at that point, we found that $3 billion worth of services went to homeless individuals in that 6-year period, which is about $520 million a year. I can't even think of that number in money. Like if you take a $100 bill and you put that in 3 billion of them together, I'm sure it would fill up the room that you're in.
That's a lot more money than I have currently on me today.
Right.
And probably a lot of us in this building
Right.
feel very similar.
I think if we combined all the money in this building, it would
It's
not
probably
equal up.
still under that amount.
Way under, right? So billion. So in that time, that's $1.9 billion of healthcare services, $786 million of judicial services. And this is to a point where this is money we cannot imagine, and this is money that was not going to resolve the issue, that was not going to end homelessness, but just going to do a temporary fix in that short amount of time. The statistic that gets me still to this day is the top 5% of that population. The 2,800 individuals at the very top used about 47%, nearly half of that $3 billion, which means individuals that are considered persistently homeless, or that we know of as chronically homeless, had an average cost of $83,000 in services per year. And again, guys, this is about 10 years ago almost. This is over close to 10 years ago. So with inflation, with the cost of everything, $83,000 back 10 years ago means a lot more today. We literally could have put a down payment on a house for every single one of the 2,800 individuals.
10 years ago, yes.
And 10 years ago, and could have ended their homelessness, right? So it's a shocking statistic of what it was costing our county back in the day. And so what we want to do is take a look, and out of that study came out, of course, our Office of Supportive Housing in 2011, 2012, and we had an arm in our department in the county that represented voices for individuals that are homeless, that represented a union for services, and really all the systems that we take joy in today, the coordinated entry system and our coordination of city, county, and federal funding in a way. This all kind of came out of that study. It was revolutionary. In the same vein, if we take a look at statistics of LGBTQ individuals that are homeless in the same county, there is a much more likelihood, in fact, 200% likelihood for someone who is gay, lesbian, or bisexual adult to live below 200% of the federal poverty line compared to their heterosexual counterparts. And same thing with the judicial system. There's a disproportionate number of youth in the judicial system. 13% of them identify as LGBTQ, and this is in Santa Clara County. These are our local statistics. This is a graph talking about youth homelessness versus homelessness for LGBTQ youth versus heterosexual homelessness. About 29% of individuals identify as LGBTQ youth who are homeless in Santa Clara County, and about 10% of adults identify as LGBTQ, as part of the LGBTQ community in Santa Clara County, which means the chances of us running into someone who may have micro trauma or trauma from being misgendered or being mistreated or not really presenting with their full self, not feeling safe in the conversations that they're having from service providers are quite high, which makes it much more likely that someone that we're working with, depends on how we address them, that trauma is going to come out, is going to come across in the interaction, which makes it much more important for us to use the material and to make conversation and create a safe place for individuals. Next, we're going to talk about LGBTQ community and suicide.
Yeah, I can take that for y'all. So in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community, suicide is a very big topic for us because we do have a higher rate of suicide in our youth population. Specifically, lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. They're 4 times more likely to attempt. Nearly half of transgender respondents, specifically in this county in their health assessment, seriously considered suicide or hurting themselves during the past 12 months.
Half.
That's half. So when we're talking about LGBTQ folks that come into this facility, they come into HomeFirst, we're talking about folks who were youth, folks who may have been rejected in the past, who may have lost their housing, who may have had their families say, we don't want you here, may have had their culture or their religion. They have been told a lot of very negative things about their identity, which has a very high impact on their self-esteem, on their mental health. And folks don't just lose that when they become adults. So what we find as folks age, as they become adults, as they become older adults, they carry this trauma with them. And that means that our adults are also very much likely to be carrying this trauma, maybe likely to need mental health assistance, and they're more likely to be homeless because of all the stuff that's happened in their youth. So suicide is a really big deal for us because it does have a lot of impact throughout the life as a youth.
Definitely. And same goes for adults, that if someone is struggling with homelessness, that they have a higher impact, that has a higher impact of trauma, that has a higher impact on their mental health and how they're going to seek services and how they're going to reach out. So as a whole, the population that we serve at HomeFirst, we're going to see individuals that are experiencing such traumas, and we're going to have to be just that much more supportive and be and identify safe spaces and make sure that all of our shelters and all of our offices and all of our conversations are safe spaces for individuals to be their full self. The LGBTQ community also has a high impact in violence. Here's some statistics also from Santa Clara County. The last one is from the Human Rights Campaign, so it's national. For physical assault, 10% of LGBTQ survey respondents reported that they were attacked or injured in the past 12 months because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. 10% just because of, again, how they identify.
For intimate partner violence, 1 out of every 5 LGBTQ respondents reported having been hit, slapped, pushed, kicked, or physically hurt by an intimate partner at some point. That's 3 out of 4 who've experienced violence did not report it to law enforcement, which is to say, intimate partner violence, there's this myth that LGBTQ people don't experience it when you have a same gender relationship, when two people look like they're the same sex, that they can't hurt each other because they're quote unquote on the same level. They don't have power over each other, and that is a myth. I want to put that outside, close the door. That is not something that's true. LGBTQ people are often survivors of intimate partner violence, and many of which don't feel comfortable speaking about it because they're told that they shouldn't be having this happen to them. That if they're two men, that like you should be able to stick up for yourself. You should be able to fight for yourself. There are these notions of gender and identity that are put onto our community, and when police, law enforcement, folks in power, folks that come to help report the crimes come out, they don't necessarily always help them in ways that are actually helpful.
Right.
So I was sitting on one of our blue ribbon task force for the county not too long ago, and we would commonly hear stories about how someone who was in the same gender relationship, their partner was hurting them. They managed to get the police to come out, and the police officer came, responded, began to fill out a report, but then didn't complete the report, didn't submit the report, because the police officer didn't find that instance to be serious enough to deserve his attention or their attention. Yeah.
It's an atrocity, and at the same time, intimate partner violence is just that. There's dynamics in a relationship that there's a power struggle, and if there's intimate partner violence, there's that aspect too, of the phases of violence and the phases and stages of a relationship. So a person might not feel strong to reach out and report the abuse, and then like Anthony was saying, once they do reach out and want to make the report, the system can get in their way. The system can get in their way in even experiencing the type of justice that one would expect from our parts of community. So someone who's coming across our shelter setting who has experienced an intimate partner has not had a successful contact, may not have had a successful contact with the systems of out there, and they might see systems of care like the judicial system with the police system as being against them, and then that's a large part of why someone may not feel that they want to reach out in services in the first place, or a lot of why these violent crimes are not reported. These are just the statistics that were reported, remember, so there's still a lot that isn't reported out there.
Yeah, there's more unreported than there is reported. And I do want to add to this, I don't want you all here in this training to feel like the police, law enforcement are folks that you cannot trust. That is not what I'm trying to say. There are actually quite a bit of reforms and quite a bit of work that's gone into the criminal justice system in Santa Clara County. And work has been done, is currently being done to improve outcomes. So this is changing. This is changing at this very moment. So everything I said before, take with a grain of salt. It is hopefully going to change, but that doesn't mean the historical trauma is gone. The LGBTQ community as a whole still carries that historical trauma, and there's still that fear that you can't get the type of response you would get if you were a heterosexual person, if you were a cisgender person. Cisgender, and we'll talk about this in a second, cisgender meaning that you're not transgender, that you identify with the gender you were told you were supposed to identify with.
The last statistics here on hate crimes. Overall number of hate crimes in the United States from 1996 to 2011 dropped by nearly 30%. But the number of anti-gay hate crime violence across that country still rose from 1,206 to 1,256. So by 50 incidences in that time, it still rose when overall the country was seeing a decline.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of a to make this sound more important, 50 people doesn't sound like a lot. 50 people would fit into this building easily. I'm sure 50 people come in here every day. But when you have a third of the number of violent crimes drop everywhere else, and the number for anti-gay, anti-homosexual, heterosexual, right. The opposite, just in case that wasn't clear. stays the same, what you're seeing is that violence is consistent.
Right.
That LGBTQ people are seeing the same violence year after year, while everyone else is feeling safer.
Right. And that goes to show that this is still something we need to work on together. This is still an area that, again, these are national statistics. So if we were to take a look at a graph, and you would see that graph eventually go down over time for the national statistics, you would see the graph remain steady for that 1206 to 1256 for individuals of anti-gay hate crimes across the country. And then in 2016, advocates through Human Rights Campaign tracked 23 deaths of transgendered individuals that were due to a fatal assault. So that's high, but I'm sure it's not all the deaths that were reported.
No, and also every year that number goes up. At this point this year, that number is still already over 23. It's a consistent loss of lives in our community, the LGBTQ community, and it's something that transgender activists, LGBTQ activists are trying to bring more light to. So you may see that in the news, especially as the year progresses.
And healthcare with the LGBTQ community. Seniors, there's a national survey that was done around the ages of 45 to 75, and this found that 7% of respondents reported that they rely on government planning for their retirement, and that 40% of LGBTQ people in their 60s or 70s stated that their healthcare provider did not know of their sexual orientation. They did not feel comfortable in sharing their sexual orientation with the person who is most closely related to provide them with healthcare services, which is a disparity. Again, they don't feel safe for individuals to know. And someone who's in their 60s and 70s were living through the era, in the 60s and 70s where individuals were fighting for their own rights. Individuals were, we were having our movements in the 60s and 70s here in the United States. So if individuals who are going through that trauma have seen so much progress happen, still do not feel comfortable in sharing their sexuality and sharing their orientation with their healthcare provider, against these, it goes to show how prevalent the lack of safety is in the systems that touch base in our daily lives.
And I think a great way to also highlight the reason why folks in their 60s and 70s may not come out to their healthcare providers. If you're looking at healthcare in general, respondents to Santa Clara's health assessment stated that there are not enough health professionals who are adequately trained to work with LGBTQ people. More than 1 in 10 respondents reported some type of discrimination by healthcare professionals in the past 12 months. Which is to say, we do have healthcare providers that do provide adequate healthcare, but 90% of them do not know what to do, and do so in a way that actively hurts their patients. And discrimination doesn't have to be, oh, I hate you, or I won't touch you, or I won't treat you. Discrimination can be subtle. It can be something like a couple comes in and they have children, and it's a pediatrician appointment. They want to just, get care for their kid, and the pediatrician, the doctor, doesn't recognize the parents. They only talk to one person and ignore the other. They might see both being the same gender and talk about a father that isn't there or a mother that isn't there, and actively ignore the fact that this is an LGBTQ couple. They might see a person, and that person may be transgender. They may have transitioned, or they may not have transitioned, and they may not be talking about care that has to do with the gender they are presently or they're transitioning, which can mean that if someone transitioned from female to male, they were born with a female reproductive system, but their identity, their person, their life, they wish to transition to be more representative of who they are. They transition to be more masculine. They may still have working reproductive systems, genitalia, parts of their body that are still technically feminine, technically female. They may need a pap smear. They may need a mammogram. They may need medical treatment that wouldn't be provided to men, technically. And they may not receive that if the doctor doesn't know anything about LGBTQ health or doesn't care to help that person in that way. There are very many more instances in which folks experience discrimination. Transition-related care can be very difficult to come by for folks, especially if their medical insurance doesn't cover transition-related care, or if it covers a very narrow version of that. And generally talking about AIDS, HIV, safe sex, incident partner violence. When it comes to talking about LGBTQ people, doctors don't know what to say. They're not always comfortable. And in my experience, when I was younger and I tried to come out to I think it was a pediatrician then, but one of my primary care doctors, when I told them that I was having thoughts about the same gender, that I was sexually attracted to that person, they said to me, "You can't be thinking of that. Are you sure? Are you sure you're thinking about that?" And they were really, really insistent that I must be wrong, which to me made me feel like it wasn't safe to be out in that environment. So when we look at our seniors, if you see that we have healthcare professionals that aren't quite there, that don't know how to have these conversations, don't know how to provide adequate care to this community, it doesn't make sense why a senior would feel comfortable coming out after having 50, 60 years, 70 years experience with all the worst discrimination there is. There is still this barrier to saying, I feel safe with you.
Right.
So a lot of seniors will come in, if they have a partner, they'll call their partner their friend. They won't talk about things that have to do with their sex life or anything more personal. They'll try to keep it as generic as possible. And they're really missing out on quality care if you're not getting into those deeper parts of their identity.
Exactly. And that can also come across in our systems of care with the VI's PDAT, with questions that we ask, and if we create a safe space for someone to identify as LGBTQ and recognize that they may be in need of a certain service that isn't aligned with what we would assume, quote unquote, from what we see, then they can really miss out on those healthcare services. And in our population, substance use and mental health is quite prevalent, and nearly half of those who responded to our county assessment reported that they might have needed professional help in the last 12 months and last year because of mental health or substance use concerns. So, and that's quite prevalent for individuals in the LGBTQ community, but also in trauma communities, in homelessness communities. So again, for the folks that we meet every day, the folks that we provide services to every day, we have to be very careful in creating that safe space, and have to be very careful in how we provide services and ask for the services that we needed. There is less room for us to assume. And frequently, LGBTQ persons have a great difficulty finding shelters that accept them and respect them. Again, this is a national phenomenon, and that's something that we're trying to change in Santa Clara County. That's changing here at HomeFirst, right? And I know we have an a transgender shelter that may be it's in the talks to be being built.
It's
here
on
in Santa
its
Clara.
way currently.
Okay.
It's been funded. If it hasn't opened already, and I haven't checked recently, it's opening very soon. It's a place where the idea is that folks who identify as transgender, gender expansive, LGBT, that wouldn't feel safe, comfortable in a general shelter that's open to everyone, maybe will have the ability to stay for a short period in that shelter to feel safe. It's not 100% how the way that how it works,
Right.
but it's kind of a way to fix some of the bigger violence and discrimination that happens to the community as a whole.
Right. That doesn't mean that the rest of our shelters in general are going to stop serving individuals, right, who are from the LGBT community. That doesn't mean, or work with transgendered individuals. That means that there is an identified place. However, we are all safe places. We all need to make steps towards making sure that we are in charge of and check our own biases, and really bring our most professional self to work when we're providing customer service and enhanced assessments and treatment to individuals. LGBTQ individuals experiencing homelessness are often also at a heightened risk for violence, abuse, and exploitation compared to their heterosexual peers. We kind of saw the statistics lately just around in the community. And transgender people are particularly at physical risk due to the lack of acceptance and are often turned away from shelters.
Yeah.
This is a national phenomenon. And again, this is something that we're trying to change here. And it just might be that they're turned away because they don't understand how to serve someone, or they don't know how to address the policies of a particular shelter to meet the needs of a certain individual. And those are the conversations that are taking place in our county, at HomeFirst, at all the places that provide services to individuals in homeless services right now, is how do we make a comfortable and safe space for everyone? And we're not always going to have the right answer. So it's not always going to be a fix for everyone. But the fact that we're trying and leveling the field so that everyone has equal access makes the biggest difference. In the LGBTQ community, 40% of homeless youth served by agencies identified as being part of the LGBTQ community. 43% of individuals served at drop-in centers identified as LGBTQ. 30% of street outreach clients identified as LGBTQ individuals. And then 30% of clients utilizing housing programs identified as LGBTQ. So that means in every single program that we serve, from youth programs to drop-in shelters to outreach programs to any of our housing permanent, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, we're going to see individuals who are part of the LGBTQ community in all of our programs. That means this applies to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So the question comes up, why is there LGBTQ homelessness? The most frequent reason that could be contributed to this is family rejection, and that's based on their sexual orientation or the fact or how they identify. It's just not being welcomed by your family of origin, being able and being shunned away. The second most common reason is being forced out by their parents after coming out. Those kind of seem similar, but there's a difference between family rejection and being forced out. And I think you talk a little bit about what's forced out.
Yeah, so when someone's forced out by their parents, by their family, by their friends or their community, what you're hearing is someone saying that they have been physically excluded from living, partaking in that space. They can't live in the home, they can't see certain people. They're essentially forced to be somewhere else. Whereas when we say family rejection, what we mean is the actions, the words, the behavior that a person does, says on a daily basis that tells the LGBTQ person whether or not they are being accepted. So the parent doesn't have to force out their child to make them feel rejected. They can say things about their clothing and say that's not appropriate and how they're being shameful. They can talk about how their identity is a sin or how it's bad or how it's going to lead their life to ruin, or a lot of negative words, a lot of negative phrases, especially when we're talking about culture or religion. If those phrases are used, especially consistently, a person will feel rejected. They will feel like they don't belong. They will feel like that they're not a part of this community. What we find, though, is that when a family tries to do anything that's more accepting, that the rate of homelessness and also the rate of suicide drops. So if a family maybe doesn't 100% accept their child, but they like 70% accept their child, or they 50% accept their child, they 40% accept that person in their life, they're doing actions that say, hey, I'm not there yet. I'm not 100%. I don't 100% understand everything about who you are in your community, but I say things like, I love you. I say things like, I never want to see you hurt. I will stand up for you, even if I don't completely understand. I will help you find places and people that you feel comfortable with. If those actions and behaviors are accepting, we have better health outcomes over the lifespan. So rejection is more about behavior, and forcing out is physically making someone be separate from their community, from their family. And forcing out is likely to cause someone to enter homelessness, be that couch surfing, staying with a friend for a while, maybe actually living on the streets, entering some of our shelter services if they're youth, maybe a runaway shelter, maybe the foster care system. There are different ways people enter homelessness, and you all are better prepared in other trainings than this to talk about that.
Right, and that when an individual comes into the shelter setting from being forced out, that rejection, that microstigma could be seen from their peers as well. That could be seen from shelter providers as well. So we want to be cognizant and reminded to make sure that we provide the best services that we can out there, and understand that this is unique to this person's experience. Not everyone could have been forced out. There could be very many different reasons why someone is entering into homelessness, and we want to hear from their unique experience.
All this is based on perception too. So someone who feels rejection may feel rejection from different things than another person. And this goes back to our conversation on pronouns. One person may feel rejected, or like there was a microaggression, aggression towards them if you use the wrong gender pronoun, where another person will come in and will be completely unfazed. It will not bother them. So we have to be aware that people are impacted by our actions differently.
Right. It depends on the trauma they've gone through. It depends on what's quote unquote a trigger for them,
Yes.
right? And that's something that we have to be very careful and conscious about. There also exists landlord biases for individuals, for not just youth, but individuals seeking housing. Someone's much more likely to become or remain homeless because of overt discrimination when someone's seeking alternative housing. Especially federally funded institutions that frequently contribute to the growing rate of homeless youth in our community. I would say also homeless LGBTQ adults in our community because of the same reason. A landlord can give you any excuse and turn it into a, well, this family was a better fit. There were more individuals. They had a better source of income, so I'm going to go with them compared to the couple who happens to be from the same gender couple sitting in front of them.
Yeah. In my experience, me and my partner, same gender. Whenever we look for housing, we generally will refer to ourselves as roommates because we know that the idea of two masculine identified men, people that look like men, getting housing sounds better when they're roommates. That's acceptable. You've heard of two men living with each other. You've heard of two women living with each other as roommates. But when people start coming out as like, this is my life partner, this is my fiance, this is my whatever that person's relationship with the other person is, that's more intimate, more than just a roommate or just a friend. People get uncomfortable sometimes, and we find that it's easier to say, I'm not LGBT to get housing, and then come out later or not come out at all.
Right.
Because there is a chance, and this is very similar with racial discrimination. There is a chance that the person will give you some other reason. The other person could pay more. They gave me 10 months in advance. They don't have a dog or a kid, and those are all valid reasons. But you will never 100% know why you're being discriminated against because there's so many other ways to say no to someone.
Exactly. But this bias exists. And as housing providers, as individuals working in housing, we know this exists for individuals that are homeless. We would never put someone who's homeless in front of a landlord and that was the first criteria or that was the first aspect of who they are that we would want to highlight. In fact, we talk a little bit about that in other trainings of how do you present, how do you work with someone who is homeless and really work on building out who they are as their full self, right? This is very unique. A landlord bias exists regardless. And for the LGBT community, this is something that could mean further homelessness for someone.
Exactly.
All right, so next we're going to get into terminology. We're going to take a look at the gender identity expression orientation worksheet and take a look at some of the dimensions first, and then we take a look at the worksheet as well. So there are very many different dimensions of gender. Our gender begins at our assignment. We're assigned a certain sex when we're born, but that gender is a complex interrelationship between what is our body, what is our identity, and then what is our gender expression. That's sort of the dimension of what our gender is. And each one of these dimensions can really vary across a range of possibilities. A person's comfort in their gender, of course, can be related to how they feel in harmony to those things, to their body, to their identity, and then their expression. Our body is our experience of who we are, how society sees our bodies, how they gender assume who we are, and how we interact with others based on our body. Our identity is a deeply held or an internal sense of self as a blend of who we are, as let's say either a male, a female, a combination of both or neither, but who we internally know ourselves to be. It's kind of when you have a conversation with yourself, that's how you identify yourself. Who are you to your own self? That's your identity. And then your expression is how we present our gender for the world, to our society, to our culture and community, to our family, and how we interact with the world. This helps shape our gender. Our gender expression is related to our roles in society as well, and how society uses those roles sometimes to try to conform us to what we've kind of deemed as gender norms, right? There's this sense of binary for a long time that either you're born male or female, and then there are gender specific roles that can be. And what we want you to think about is that it's beyond that. It's less of a one or the other, but more of a spectrum. An individual's experience could be varied based on how they feel their body, their identity, and their expression to be. in their course of a time. And most societies view sex as, like we talked about, that binary concept. It's very rigid. It's based on their genitals or their sex chromosomes or their reproductive structures. But even a sex binary fails to capture a lot of the spectrum of individuals, forms of genitalia that are classified as male or female, that are naturally occurring in intersex conditions that demonstrates that sex can exist in a continuum, that even biologically our body can continue on a different spectrum. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to watch a video on the definition of intersex and kind of what that is. But I'll let Anthony explain a little bit about the combination of the three between body, identity, and expression in this form.
Yeah, definitely. So before I do anything, I just want to preface that if you see this astronaut picture in front of you and you see the word draft on there, do not be alarmed. This is a version of a infographic, as I may say, that we use in a lot of trainings. I've called this the gender red man, the gender unicorn. This is the Soji astronaut. The draft just means that this is a version. It's an adequate version for what we're going to do today. If you see something else with a unicorn or a gingerbread person on there, it's the same idea, just presented in a different way. So what we have in front of us is the Soji astronaut. Soji standing for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And that's really what we're going to break down with this astronaut. On the right-hand side, you'll see 5 boxes. On the top, you see your attraction, what's attracted to, gender identity, gender expression, pronouns, which we talked about already, and also our sex assigned at birth. All of these boxes, all of these parts help make up our Soji, our identity overall. All of us, everyone in this room, feels some sort of attraction in some way to another person or to some other entity. And this may be a little abstract, but I'm going to see where y'all go with me. So our attraction can be to women, to people who express femininity. They can be to men, people who express masculinity. They can be to multiple genders. It can be a combination. Maybe I'm attracted to folks who have some femininity to them, but also are masculine. So maybe feminine men or masculine women. Or maybe I'm attracted to someone who's like kind of androgynous, like their sex, gender doesn't really fit in a box, but that's not why, like there's something else about them. Also, if you see on the left-hand side, there is that little crossed out O that we usually see as do not enter. That can mean that our attraction to can actually be an attraction to nothing. Maybe we don't experience attraction to people based on gender or based on sex. Maybe we don't experience attraction. That is a possibility. And what this little conglomeration of planets is supposed to show us is that we can fit anywhere along the line there, and that our attraction is kind of like a galaxy. It's not a perfect straight line. It's not yes or no. It's not binary. It's not 1 to 100. It's up, down, left, right, north, south, east, west, and every opinion, every objective coordinate area. It's kind of like going on a Star Trek adventure. You don't really know which way's up because you're in space.
Right. There's no right answer.
There is no right answer. The same thing goes for gender identity. Our gender identity can be as a woman, as maybe we identify a binary woman to be. It could be as a man, the ideal of a binary man. Agender, meaning we don't experience any gender. We don't see ourselves as a gender, and because of that, don't identify with a gender. Or it can be a combination. And that, again, may sound confusing or complex. And you don't have to have a perfect image in your mind. You just have to know that someone may have a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th different gender identity option, and that if they express that they identify with that option, that is true for them, and we respect that. We don't have to understand everything in our universe. We just have to respect other folks who do understand it. Our gender expression, that's kind of what Jan was talking about with body. Our gender expression is the way that we show our body. We show the way we dress. Maybe we look, we dress, we appear, we perform femininity. Maybe we dress or look or perform masculine. Maybe that means wearing makeup. Maybe that means not wearing makeup. Hygiene, type of clothes you wear. There are a lot of different ways that we show our gender expression. Maybe it's the way that we speak, our voice, the mannerisms we do. If you could see my body right now, I use a lot of hand gestures, which people will generally say are feminine qualities. That's not necessarily true,
right.
But that can be a way of having your gender expressed. And also, it could be nothing. There's always the option for none. And when we look at those 3 boxes, really a person is comprised of different ways that this, let's call it a scale, the spectrum, can be placed. So your attraction can be at 0, just you're not attracted to anyone. Your gender identity can be agender. Your gender expression could be masculine. You can have no gender identity. You do not identify with any gender, but still express yourself masculinely, because those are different things. You can like the way masculine clothes look. You can like the way feminine clothes look. You can like sparkles. You can like black. You can like any body hair, no body hair, all these things, and that doesn't have to match with their gender identity. You can be a woman with a beard, with masculine clothes. You can be all of these things because we understand that folks may not have transitioned. They may look like a man. They may identify as a woman and not have the means to transition. They may not want to transition. There's a lot of, like we said earlier, a lot of violence towards transgender people in our community. And some folks may choose to live in the closet because it's safe for them to live in the closet and not show who they are than it is to live their true self and then be the target of violence. There's just thousands of ways that those 3 can be put together. And then we add pronouns, the way that we refer to people. So this person can be an asexual, meaning not attracted to someone, agender, meaning showing no gender, androgynous, meaning maybe they have no gender expression, and they may want to be referred to as him. They may want to be referred to as they. Or there's another one here you may see called see, hear, and hears. That is an option that some people use to identify a gender-neutral pronoun. It is not the most common pronoun, so do not be alarmed. You do not have to memorize this, but it is an option that does exist. Something else, maybe they don't use pronouns, and maybe they use their name. All of those are options, and we just need to be aware of the one that person uses, the one that they identify with. The last one we have are sex assigned at birth. That's the one we have no control over. When we're born, or come out into this world on a hospital table, or wherever you were born, and the doctor looks at you, they look between your legs, and they decide in the first moments whether or not you're male or female, or if your gender, your genitalia is ambiguous, you might be intersex, meaning that they can't tell right at birth. Maybe your chromosomes are different, maybe something happened, and you just have a little bit of both. And that can look like anything. We're not going to talk too much about looks and appearance because it's not that important. But it's possible that you're a sex assigned at birth, maybe female, your gender identity may be male. You may be intersex at birth, have ambiguous genitalia, and you may identify as a man. You might identify as a woman. You might identify as both. All of these options still exist. And what this chart does is it helps us look at the different ways these coordinates can line up. It's really complex.
Right. There's no box. No one fits in one particular box, and then we're not meant to. We're human beings with complex emotions and feelings about who we are, and that is hard to explain to someone in a conversation. So especially when you're asking someone for their pronouns, you're sharing your pronouns, we're getting a small picture of how they want the world to see them, how they want to be identified in the world. It's not the whole story, right? Until you get to know someone and really get to know their experience and their culture, in their worldview, and their values, and how they were developed and who they are in relation, of course, to the services that we're providing. Then that's how you're going to find out a little bit more about them. And it takes a long time, and this is a process. This takes a lot of rapport building. This takes a lot of really creating empathy and working with someone from that point of curiosity. So our gender identity as body, our bodies themselves are gendered in that cultural context, in those expectations that we have from masculine to feminine, and they're equated with physical abilities that we have and how someone labels us, either a man or a woman, or to the degree of both. But this, of course, gendering idea affects how we feel about ourselves and how others perceive us. So yes, there's this binary form of gender out there, but we're trying to challenge that. And the point of this training is to get you guys to see beyond that, and for you to see beyond just those two forms, and see that there is a medium, a spectrum in between for others and how they identify themselves.
Before we go into this section, we do have a handout. So at this point, the facilitator may want to pass out copies of this handout. We're going to show you on the screen what it is. We have permission from the Harvard Medical School to share this with you all, and it's terminology related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and a bit more.
Right. So this form is 3 pages long. It talks about the common forms of gender identity, how someone will identify themselves, and it covers the terms that we've been talking about, like cisgender, how someone his identity it aligns with their birth identity, and transgender when it does not align. Talks about the differences between the two, transgender male, transgender female.
But also genderqueer, those gender expansive terms that don't perfectly fit between being a trans man or a trans woman. All of those can fit under an umbrella that we talk about as being genderqueer, maybe non-binary, or gender non-conforming.
Right. And it gives a little bit more examples to how gender expression can be seen in what we wear, in our behavior. And page 2 talks a little bit about the sex assignment at birth, and then of course the pronouns that we can use. It gets a little bit more into orientation. And this is another place where you'll see the different pronouns that are listed here. And as Anthony mentioned, we do have permission from the Harvard Medical School to use this for training purposes at HomeFirst. So feel free to pass this, feel free to make copies of it, feel free to have it available to you to reference. And that gender neutral terms, they, them, theirs, is definitely something that you're able to use if you're not sure of how someone would want to be referred to themselves and you want to be respectful without assuming. That's a great neutral term for you to use. And Anthony, you have a great exercise that you explain of how you would use a gender neutral, pronoun like the Z and Zers. That's not something that I've heard of. But if someone identifies as that, how would I become more comfortable using it? I would feel stuck a little, maybe.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of ways you can practice using pronouns you're unfamiliar with, pronouns you've maybe not tasted before. I want to first say that the pronoun they, them, and theirs is a lot more common in our language than we may assume. If anybody in this room has kids or has been around kids, and I'm pretty sure we've all been kids at some point, and if you haven't, we can talk later. We'll figure out how to get my contact information. I want to learn more about you. We've all heard a situation where a teenager, a kid, wants to hang out with their friends at the mall, at their friend's house, and they don't want to tell their parents exactly who it is. The parents say, "Hey, who are you hanging out with? You said you're going to be out at the mall today. Are you going to be with XYZ?" And the kid responds, "You know them. They're great. You met them at school during back to school night. They're part of my Spanish class." And they use the word they, them, theirs specifically to avoid gender, to kind of get rid of the idea that the person may be feminine or masculine. And we do it all the time too. We just don't notice when we do it. So I want to say you can use they, them, theirs commonly, and people won't be alarmed. It's a lot easier to do than it sounds. But if you do need to practice, so what I do is if you have a toaster at home, you get your toaster. If you don't have a toaster, find another appliance. A coffee maker will work. Blender is great. A microwave will work. If you have a potted plant, that works too. I don't do the potted plant because I don't know why. I just don't. You get your toaster. You take out your toaster. You put it on the table. You put it on the counter, wherever it feels comfortable for a toaster to be in your home. You know where that is. I don't. Don't put it on your bed or the bathtub. That may be a bad choice. You can if you want, but I don't recommend it. You put the toaster down and you give the toaster a name. Whatever name. I'm going to name my toaster Jeremy. So my toaster Jeremy sits on my counter. And I'm going to practice using the Z, Zir, Zirs pronouns, which I don't usually use. So Jeremy, Z will be here today. Z replaces he or she.
Right.
Zir makes my toast. Is that right? No, that's not right. That would be him makes my toast. So I hear that, I'm like, wait, no.
They make my toast would be Z.
So Z makes my toast. I give Zir my toast, and you can practice that because it's awkward and it's not a word that we know. It's not comfortable in our mouths. There's a lot of ways to make mistakes and not know it. You heard me make a mistake right there, and I did not plan that. I actually made a mistake. So there you go.
Learning opportunities. We didn't hurt the toaster's feelings.
There's no toaster here, actually. I'm looking at what looks like a hole punch. So really, I'm looking at a hole punch. But you can do that. You don't have to practice on people. You can practice on your own. And know that if you make mistakes with a person, what you do is you apologize. You say, hey, I'm sorry. That was a mistake. You correct yourself. Use the correct pronoun. Use the correct name. And you move on. You do not apologize profusely. You do not tell the person how this is your first time. You're not used to this. You're trying really hard. This is so hard. Transgender people just have so many things they need. Queer people, queer being the term that I sometimes use to replace LGBTQ. Queer is easier to say. If it feels uncomfortable to say the word queer, don't use it. It can be derogatory. It has been reclaimed by a lot of LGBTQ people, but some older folks and some folks in the community still feel hurt by it. So that is not a recommendation, just a fact. You apologize, you correct yourself, you move on, and you don't stay too much on that moment because you don't want to make it about you.
Right.
You want to make it about providing service, providing care, doing your job, but also doing it in a way that respects the person in front of you.
Exactly. That you want to create that open communication. You want to create a door for them to continue to seek services without labeling, without mislabeling. Right. So this handout is great in giving us some of those common pronouns. And Anthony, thank you for sharing that example of how we can use that learning method, right? We're all beings of learning and we understand language differently. So we can really take the lessons and actualize them before we are placed in a situation where we have to then use them, then act on them in a way. And the very third table, here are some sexual orientation identities. And again, Anthony mentioned the different times in LGBTQ, and he mentioned the word Q, and he did mention that queer is something that is seen as a derogatory term in sense, and it is. So our recommendation is for you not to use that term to identify someone else unless they've used that word to identify themselves and are comfortable with the term. So you do not have the permission to call someone queer unless they themselves have reclaimed the word and are using it in conversation with you. And then you want to take a look at the context. You want to take a look at who's around you, how you're using the term in order to really embrace the message that you're trying to get across. It's about the experience that this person is sharing with you. So you want to use it within that context.
There's also some good examples here on the bottom at Beyond Basics. You'll see things like dyke or top, bottom, bear, switch, twink, daddy. Those are words that are okay for me to say as a gay man, but may not be appropriate for you to say in casual conversation. Because a lot of those have very specific cultural meaning. A lot of them are very sex specific or very specific to a niche part of the community, niche identity. And if you don't know them, if you're not comfortable with them, if you're not a part of the community, it's not always safe to go around calling someone a butch, a dyke, a bottom. Please do not go around calling people bottoms. If you know what that means, I hope you're giggling. If you don't know what that means, you can look it up later. I'm not going to go too much into it right now. But there are words that are appropriate for the community to use, and it's better if you just listen, observe, take it in, and use maybe a more professional response.
Right.
You don't have to always use the same words, but when someone uses the word queer, you can use it as a response. I identify as queer. In response, you can say, oh, okay, I see you identify as queer. Would you like me to say that you identify as queer in the future? Or just leave it like that?
Exactly.
And a lot of the time, leaving it like that is totally fine.
Right. And like Anthony mentioned, if you don't feel comfortable using the word yourself, then don't use it. We want you to be comfortable in providing these services in your own skin and make sure that this is an experience that's comfortable for you. It's hard to be genuine if you yourself don't feel comfortable. And this has to be a genuine interaction that you're having with someone in providing good customer service, in providing good professional assessment and care. So that's the one thing we want you to take away from is if you have some level of curiosity, that's great. Make sure that you're doing this. You're asking about can I ask you a little bit about that from that perspective of understanding this person from a non-judgmental perspective and point of view. So thank you for going through that worksheet. If you guys again need to pause us to have more conversation, please feel free to do so at any time. It's a great worksheet to have. And next we're going to take a look at this video on intersex.
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon.
I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are Intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed. But I'm perfectly healthy, and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl. And I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses, and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there is nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful. You're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there. We're out here. We're here. I just hope you can find us.
This is our short video on intersex, and hopefully this will generate some conversation around what that means for folks, what having an experience outside of that gender binary is for folks. So if there's any thoughts that came up from the video, feel free to pause us. Feel free to have that with the facilitator and with the room at hand. So next, here we are kind of thinking about putting it all into practice and putting everything together and sharing what this will look like in our work. And the way we're going to do that is by doing this gender identity exercise. We're going to leave the prompts up here for you. You also have this in the room with the facilitator. So we're going to explain, they can explain the exercise, we can explain the exercise, and then we can get started. These 4 questions are on the handouts in front of you, and we want you to facilitate, kind of break yourselves up into small groups of 3 or 4, depending on how large the room is, and create a safe space. Again, this is safe. We want you to think about your own experience of gender, of gender identity, of expression, and ask yourselves these questions, and then share your responses with your colleagues here safely. The first question is about who and or what gave you messages about your gender growing up. What did your parent or family member tell you about gender when you were growing up? What did it mean to be the gender that you are? Did culture or community play a role in your understanding, experience, or expression of gender? Did school, peer groups, friends, faith-based communities, or other communities play a role in your understanding, experience, and expression of gender?
Was there ever a time when your gender and the social rules around you didn't match? Also, lastly, who and or what policed you? Meaning, who told you what you could and couldn't do around your gender, performance of your gender?
Feel free to pause this at this point, have these wonderful conversations, and we'll get back to you in a second.
Have fun.
Okay, so hopefully you guys had some great conversations around that activity and got some insightful experiences of, even if you are cisgender, even if your gender and your sexual identity and orientation align, that there were some messages that you received that strongly pulled you in one direction or the other, and that these messages sometimes aren't really overt, but it's just part of the way our community presents itself, in how we shape the ideology of who we are and the role that a person has based on the gender they were born with or the gender that they physically are seen by. So that's something to kind of help cultivate that understanding of gender and kind of how deep this conversation is and how deeply it's rooted in who we are from a very young age, from toddlerhood and beyond. So we take a look at what universal language of respect looks like in some of our forms. And this is a form that I hope that you're familiar with. This is our HMIS intake form. And in our intake form, there are very many, you can see this question highlighted around gender, and there's very many different options for someone to choose in how they present their gender to be. So one great way to ask this question would be the quotation above. We want to accurately and respectfully capture your gender. So I'm going to list some options. Please tell me what works for you. This way, we are not assuming and judging based on the physical aspect of who has walked in to receive services. Again, we don't know if they're able to fully express their gender in how they're dressed because of their socioeconomic rationale. They're homeless. They're receiving homelessness services. They may not have access to a lot of things. So we don't want to assume. We want them to identify as one particular gender or another, and that's something that we may not understand. As long if we give them this list and they choose one or the other, then we respectfully mark that. We don't have to agree with it. We mark it.
And if you feel like this list isn't representative, if the person you're working with, this doesn't represent the identity they told you, that's okay. This is better than we had in the past. Before we had the other option and you would write in. You can always write in data not collected. If the client doesn't know, as in they don't know how to say their gender in words, or that doesn't make sense to them, doesn't know is fine. And if the client doesn't want to talk to you about this, they feel like this isn't information that you deserve, or they feel like telling you, it's fine if you say client refused. You can change this later. There's always a chance of doing another intake, doing another, I think it's a VI SPDAT, also leads into HMIS.
Right. So the VI SPDAT is your point of entry.
Mm-hmm.
This is beyond that point of entry. This is like enrolling into a program or a set of services. So when you're having this conversation, it's a deeper conversation, just like the VI SPDAT is a deeper conversation than a touch and go conversation. So this is a point where maybe in the beginning you identify as your pronouns and share who you are in order to create the safe space for the person you're working with. And of course, you want to make sure if there's more than the two of you in the room, right? If there's another provider, your colleague, that you ask everyone to identify their pronouns, that you don't single this person out, but you identify your pronouns and ask everyone at the table of their pronouns so that we're all creating a safe space for everyone. So by the time we get to this place of identifying gender, that we've had this conversation, this person now feels safer to share. And again, this is the measure of safety is from this person's perspective. They must feel safe in order to share who they really are. And if they don't, that's okay. It might not be something that you've done or not done, right? As long as you've been the most respectful person that you can be and the most genuinely responsive person to someone's needs, then you're doing the best that you can. That isn't a value judgment on you. That could be a degree of understanding of the micro trauma or the trauma that they're currently experiencing, and how long someone takes to feel comfortable and feel safe in an environment, in a conversation, could be very different, and it could vary from person to person. And here's another example. There's gender bias, obviously, in our VI SPDAT, and this, we're taking a look at our wellness section. And if you take a look at question number 20, right here, for female respondents only, are you currently pregnant? So how is this representing gender bias?
Give you a second here. So, in my experience, what concerns me when I read this question is we are assuming that only female respondents will answer this question, which is to say, from the point of the interviewer, the person filling in the answers to the BIS for that, if you believe, based on the earlier questions, that this person identifies quote unquote female, then answer this question. What we find in our community is that someone might identify their gender in one way, but maybe transgender, maybe gender expansive, maybe gender queer. They may be homeless and they may not have access to the ability to express their gender the way they would ideally express their gender. They may not have access to hormones. They may not have access to the ability to shave or shower frequently enough to like feel and look the way that they want to look. And you may assume that the person is masculine. You may assume the person is a man or male, but there is a chance that they're not. There is a chance that you may assume they're female, but they're not. You don't actually know their body. They know their body. And if we skip this question and assume that the person is female, we are potentially overlooking folks who may have the ability to be pregnant or maybe currently pregnant. This is, again, not something to say that you have to worry about this every time you do a VI SPDAT, that you have to be like hyper vigilant, on guard, but be aware of the cues that someone gives you when you're filling out the VI SPDAT, and be aware that this may not be an appropriate thing to only do for female respondents only. It may be better just to awkwardly say, hey, we ask everyone this question. You may not identify with it, but are you currently pregnant? The person may look at you and say, that's weird. That's unusual. Of course I'm not. The person might not. They might just look at you and say no, or not answer at all. Or the person might say, actually, I'm trans and I have been having some like sexual intercourse with folks. They might say something more less scripted than that,
Right.
But they might think that they might be pregnant,
Right.
and that can open the conversation to providing a service that they might need.
Exactly. So it's better that we create the awkwardness and we own that than putting someone else in an awkward situation. Instead of saying things like, you're not pregnant, are you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And letting them feel that micro trauma or that shock or that awkwardness, or putting them in a situation where maybe they would have shared with you that they are transgender and have female reproductive parts. Right? We don't want to put them in that situation. We want to assume and say, we ask this for everyone. Are you currently pregnant? And then the person can choose to respond however they respond. And if they respond with, what do I look like? Right? What do you think? And we say, okay, well, we just like, as I mentioned, we ask this question to everyone that we have a conduct a VI SPDAT with, and we leave it at that. We are the ones who to feel that uncomfortableness, and then we move on. Right? It doesn't put the person who this might be true event or experience for them in a bind where somehow the way this question was presented, we're blocking them from seeking and accessing the right level of services for themselves. All right, so in summary, there's a few things we want you to remember and take away: that there's a higher risk of homelessness in the LGBT communities than other communities, that LGBTQ persons experience a high proportion of violence and are less likely to report it, that there is a difference in gender expression, and that gender expression is shaped by our own experiences of gender and how we are raised by our families, how we're seen in our communities, and in our social supports. Of course, we want to convey the universal respect as part of our customer service, our program enrollment and engagement, by asking someone how they'd like to be addressed and asking them how they identify instead of assuming from what we see. Right? And the next steps are, we'd like for you to join us in a forum, if that's available, for the formerly LGBTQ, formerly homeless advocates to share their own personal experiences in shelter settings. This is yet to be scheduled. It will be here at HomeFirst And I'm not sure if we're going to get a chance to record it. I mean, if it would take some consent, and that'd be kind of an interesting thing to do. But we'd love for you to join us at this forum to talk about individuals from the LGBT community who share their stories about their times in shelters or seeking housing services or homeless services, and what it was like for them for us to really open up that dialogue and talk about what that's like. Any other questions, please direct them to the facilitator. We want to thank you for listening and for taking part in this training.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. If you have any questions directed to me, I work for the LGBTQ Wellness Program and LGBTQ Youth Space, which is a part of Kaminar, another mental health organization. You can always contact Jen. She'll have my contact information, and we'll make it available for you all.
All right, thank you very much.